Welcome to SEO Edge and welcome to Branding Basics, First Impression, Lasting Impact. Today, we'll cover an introduction to your brand, the elements of your brand, the resume in particular, the importance of a resume, format, focus, and function of a resume, and some helpful resume do's and don'ts. We'll also discuss your brand online and the conducting of a brand audit. Lastly, we'll finish off with the elevator pitch, one of the most meaningful measures of the adequacy of your brand creation. So, what is your brand? Your brand is the full potential of who you are. In other words, your brand is the full potential of your capacity to grow. Why would companies think about your potential as your capacity to grow? The heart of the matter? They know that their company isn't perfect. They know that the processes at their company aren't perfect. Companies know that the people who work for them aren't perfect too, and the work itself sure won't be perfect either. Top priority for most companies is to hire people who fully recognize that imperfection is just part of life. When people fully recognize this truth, they are able to contextualize adversity as just a challenge to grow, instead of an excuse to give up. So, in this way, the brand you communicate will help employers predict your internship performance, because it will let the company in on how you choose to grow in scenarios that will take a similar form once on the job. So, what are the essential elements of your brand? How do those elements work together to form your brand? The first area to demonstrate your potential is in your academic pursuits. Academic growth conveys your intellectual drive and predicts your intellectual capacity on the job. Employers want students who love to learn and who act on that desire to learn by challenging themselves. Why? Because an intimate engagement with the learning of any field or topic requires a thirst for learning. Next is professional growth. Professional growth predicts the quality of your work product in any given work environment. Employers want students who have completed projects that test their commitment to the bottom line. Why? Life is messy. Throughout your years, you will experience feelings of self-doubt, feelings of burnout, and feelings of apathy as well. And these feelings naturally arise when we face adversity, like when somebody in our family gets sick or we experience a financial setback. Employers want to feel confident that you've accepted that messiness is a part of life, and your job is to figure out a way to deal with that messiness and keep your commitments, instead of running away from that messiness and running away from commitments altogether. The third area to demonstrate your potential is in your social pursuits. Social growth demonstrates your ability to engage relationship building and to refine your communication skills. Employers want students who are a joy to be around, students who understand the benefit of collaborating with others. Why? Because we are social animals. Socializing can have a great effect on the rest of us. It's a stress reliever and can tap unlocked potential that will remain locked if pursued only on the individual level. Being someone others want to work with isn't just nice. It has a huge influence on the ability to meet the bottom line. Now that we've discussed how important it is to identify your growth in order to create a robust brand, let's dig into the first form that your brand will be communicated: your resume. Your resume is a snapshot of who you are professionally. In other words, your resume is the first form in which you will communicate your potential. Throughout the recruiting and interview process, your main objective is to leave a favorable impression on those you meet and to maintain that impression throughout the term of your engagement with a potential employer. So, how do we think about the role resume plays in your overall goal for the recruiting process? The resume is a reflection of the experiences that demonstrate your willingness to grow in the face of adversity. If you properly use your resume to convey that you are somebody who chooses to grow, who has a potential that is rich with examples of what that potential looks like in action, then you will move on to the interview process. As we mentioned, leaving a favorable impression with those you interact with throughout the recruiting process will result in an offer for an internship experience. This experience will then be incorporated into your resume, and the process will begin again. Now that we've discussed the role of the resume in the recruiting process, let's dive a bit deeper into how to use the resume to properly communicate your brand. For the recruiting process, your number one priority is to remember that you are, in fact, in the recruiting process. You're not preparing for a funeral, and you're not hanging out with your friends. You are trying to convince somebody to give you an opportunity. How do you convince them? You build a relationship of trust. You don't lie or embellish on your resume. Instead, you bring the other person into what your genuine experience of the challenge has been. Some of you might be too harsh on yourselves, not giving yourself credit for all of the hard work you have put in to make the experiences on your resume meaningful. Others might need a dose of reality, giving yourself too much credit for half-effort work or experience that came easy to you. Whatever the case, you can use this slide to come back to your resume framework. Your resume isn't many things, but what it is a concise representation of your skills that are relevant to the position you seek. Your resume is an action-oriented glimpse at your professional attributes, a glimpse at your potential when your will to grow is tested. Ultimately, your resume should leave the reader with a desire to learn more about you. Who is the student who is going to take on these types of challenges presented on this resume? They might be worth our consideration. So, how do you build a resume that will leave the resume reader with a desire to learn more about you? First things first, make it easy on the eyes. The average reader will take only 30 seconds to review your resume. So make those 30 seconds count by removing obstacles that might prevent the reader from getting to know you well. What are those obstacles that you should narrow in on? Number 1, format. Number 2, function. And number 3, focus. The format is the first and easiest obstacle to remove. You invite the reader in when you give them a structure their mind can count on. This is why it's so important to use a formatting checklist when putting together your resume. This slide presents a shining example of a formatting checklist. Though most items on the checklist are self-explanatory, the first and last line items deserve a special note. Why is it so important that your resume be 1 page in length? The person interviewing you is likely older than you are, and more experienced as well. Narrowing your experience to 1 page signals that you are somebody who understands the difference between relevant information and irrelevant information. This trait communicates maturity and provides one piece of evidence that you are worthy of the opportunity you seek. The last line item, highlighted in red, concerns your willingness to proofread your resume. Again, your resume is a reflection of who you are, a reflection of your potential, and a reflection of your willingness to grow. You grow by proofreading your resume, by accepting that maybe the first draft of a resume won't be perfect. But as somebody who knows that life is messy, you know that a first draft will hardly ever be perfect. Demonstrate this awareness, this trait, by proofreading your resume. Now that we've touched on the importance of formatting, let's move on to function. How do you craft a resume that means something? One that invites the reader into how impressive you are, into what your potential looks like. First things first. Illustrate, don't describe. Your job descriptions read like a story. To bring the reader into that excitement, into the woes, and into the growth inherent in that story, it's important to illustrate that experience. At SEO, we recommend that you use 3 factors to do just that. The first factor to consider is action. Use action verbs to create some clarity about what it was that you actually did. In the example above, that action is analyzed. I analyzed budget projections. The next factor to consider is scope. When you incorporate scope, you bring the reader into the full context of the situation you faced. Show me a meaningful experience, and I will show you a stressful component of that experience. Maybe you almost didn't meet that deadline for a deliverable. Maybe you were organizing an inaugural event. Maybe there was a certain amount of funds that needed to be raised. Identifying the scope of your responsibility brings the reader into the stress, the scariness, and the challenge of the experience you stepped into. The last factor to consider when drafting your job responsibilities is the impact of your action. Why did it matter that you rose to the occasion in this particular experience? What are the bottom line results that came because you chose to engage in that challenge instead of running away like other people might have? Making the connection between the action you took, the scope or context of that action taking, and the result that arose because of the action will leave the reader interested in learning more about the person behind the resume. For an example of a great resume, please refer to the SEO approved resume template available through our website and Blackboard. The above slide outlines important sections to include, and the template lays out those sections in detail. So remember, the resume is your first foot forward. The 30 seconds a recruiter takes to review a resume can have a lasting impact on your ability to transition into a summer internship. So treat the resume as an interview. Review this deck and take into account the best practices for building your resume. Resume best practices. The following slides outline some resume do's and don'ts. Take your time with each of these slides and print them out. Using these slides as well as the formatting checklist will result in a robust resume, ready for sign-off from the EDGE team. Now that you have spent a significant amount of time on the resume, let's quickly mention the next stage of brand communication, your online brand. If an employer has a resume, the next step they will take is an online brand audit. This audit will assess your online persona and give employers a sanity check to your resume. Are you the person you say you are? Or are you a fraud, presenting as someone who can handle the job when in reality you can't? Unfortunately, employers will often not communicate about the timing or general decision to audit you. This means that you may be rejected from the interview process because of your online brand and not even know it. To avoid this, use our best practices list on the right-hand side of this slide to do a personal audit of your online brand. I promise you won't regret it. After completing the resume and online brand audit, you will be ready to move to the next stage of the interview readiness process, the elevator pitch. The elevator pitch cannot be completed unless you have a solid understanding of your brand and what internship track you would like to pursue. Why is this the case? The elevator pitch is incredibly short, 45 seconds less, so should get right to the point. Hit the nail on the head by summarizing who you are, what you do or have done, and why you are the perfect candidate for the opportunity. Use the guidelines on the right of this slide to draft your initial elevator pitch and submit your elevator pitch via Blackboard to get feedback on flow. Well done! You have completed the Branding Basics deck. As a next step, please make sure to complete the branding module quiz and the branding exercises in Blackboard. Once completed, you should feel confident that you have identified your growth and can articulate your brand through your elevator pitch. Thank you for listening to the audio supplement to this deck, and best of luck in the next stage of your SEO journey.